Please be seated. Well, some of you may be happy to know that we're going to be moving out of Genesis next week. So no more long tales from the first book of the Bible. And I think we'll be out of chapter 12 in Romans. But if I'm honest, where I'm at this morning, if I'm honest, there are some episodes in Jesus' life that I would rather not have to comment on. And if I had my way, I'd happily skip right over the story of the Canaanite woman if the lectionary didn't make me deal with it. And that's because Jesus comes across as rather harsh here. He is impersonal. He's downright rude. He refuses to even hear this woman, denying any of her kind, and then likens her to a dog. This is not the Jesus that has us saying, "That's my man. There he is." No, this is the Jesus that has us saying, "Really?" And when this happens, usually when there is some discomfort, some uneasiness, some confusion that has us dealing with the bedrock of our faith, I think we have a tendency to move right along and to not stay there in that space, almost trusting that there is some guide like me that says, "Pay no attention, let's hurry on, let's go down the hallway with nothing to see here." But there is something to see here. And it is Jesus this time who's going to find out. We talked a lot about faith last week, right? You remember the story, right? Peter's in a boat, stormy outside. Jesus comes up, walking to him on the sea. Peter sees him, calls out to Jesus. Jesus says, "Hey, come on, man. Water's nice." Peter steps out of the boat. The winds come up. He feels them, sees the waves. He begins to doubt, begins to sink. Remember that? No worries, though, because Jesus and Peter are bros, right? Even when Jesus says, "Why did you doubt, you of little faith?" Jesus has Peter blow-dried and back up in the boat before we can count to 10. In the story this morning, however, the roles are somewhat different. Jesus is sort of the dark and stormy one. And instead of retreating or sinking, like Peter, the woman, instead of doubting in the midst of trial, and I'm being very generous here, in the midst of trial, she does what Peter doesn't. She takes the next step, moving closer, almost giving imagery to the phrase, "It's going to get worse before it gets better," right? And as she does this, the Canaanite woman's faith ends up moving the mountain that is Jesus. And that reversal is so key. Do you remember how we've talked about how interesting it is to notice the folks that see Jesus and know who he is right then and there? It's not his inner disciples, right? It's not the people that are closest to him. It's not his family. It's the people that are outside, right? It's the Gentiles, the unclean, the lepers, the centurions, the women, the Samaritans, those whom everybody passes by, those who are cast down. These are the ones that see Jesus for who he is first. And what is more, they name him, just as this woman does. This woman looks at him and out of nowhere says, "Help, Lord, Son of David." And to highlight this fact, right, that she sees him before Peter makes his declaration, I want you to hold on to this story next week when you hear Peter make his confession, because that's what's going to happen next week. And so, standing in the presence of this woman's faith this morning, I have to ask myself, why is it that the church has always made such a fuss over Peter's confession when there have been so many who have believed already? We know so much about Peter, but the only thing we really know about this nameless woman comes by way of her heritage. And despite thousands of years, nothing seems to have changed. What I've learned, though, is that even though she is outside the fold, Matthew seems keen on making this point, something remarkable happens in the end. Yes, her daughter is healed. But more poignantly, in an instant, Jesus is no longer just the Messiah that has been called to save the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But in this encounter with this woman, Jesus becomes God's chosen Redeemer, not just of Israel, but of the whole world, right here. And I think that's because that's who she saw him to be. That's who she confessed him to be. For Jesus, the old boundaries have vanished, right? The Jesus in Matthew's gospel, this is a very Jewish gospel. And these boundaries between who's in and who's out, they have vanished in this moment. And this came not by way of Jesus healing her daughter. The boundaries have vanished because through this woman's faith, Jesus has learned that God's purpose for him is bigger than he ever imagined. And before her, there is no going back to the boundaries that have been set before him at all. And I think that's because Jesus himself was given eyes to see and ears to hear. Faith is a gift. You've heard that, right? Faith is a gift, yes? Faith is also relational. The church is founded on such faith. And the church is changed, the church is broke open when it is given eyes to see those who demand to be seen. The Canaanite woman's call is not just to Jesus, but it's to all of us who have Christian in our name. Her words are the words that call the church to be the church, just as her words were the words that called Jesus to know himself more fully. And it is through such encounters that the church will continue to be shaped, and hopefully for the better. And so I ask, who is it amongst us here in this city of Bartlesville? Who is it amongst us, maybe even in our community, who is demanding to be seen? Who stands before us and says, "Do you see me?" Who are the folks that see us as St. Luke's and are calling us to be who we are called to be? And who that we say we are? Lovers, right? With arms wide open. Archbishop William Temple once wrote that the church exists primarily for the sake of those who are still outside of it. If you ask me, old Bill probably had a run-in with a woman from the land of Canaan. And so it shouldn't surprise us if our number is next. We should hope for it. Because after having walked this way with you for a while, I know that you'll look her right in the eye. Cross over the line in the sand that once was made. Do what you have to do. And do it with arms wide open.